Right.
Adam, sorry, can you give me screen sharing permission?
Yes.
That switched over when I switched to you as a host.
All right. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Independent District Commission Community Engagement Workgroup meeting. Today is Monday, February 27th, and we are going to be here from 6 to 7. Commissioners and community members listening in, welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay, I'll take it from here. And actually, sorry, Adam, I may have cut you off there.
Oh, no, it's all good. I was just, there we go. It was advanced. Good. And just before we get started, I want to take a moment to go over some meeting logistics. The meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of the recording will be posted on the Independent District Commission meeting website under past meeting and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. You just click on the CC button at the bottom right side of your screen. Commissioners, please set your chat settings to everyone so folks listening today can follow along. And community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available today. Feel free to submit questions or comments through there. We may not be able to answer all of the questions, but they will become a part of the meeting record itself.
And I will jump in here to do the agenda review. And actually, before we start the review of the agenda, I would like to introduce my co-facilitator for the evening, Ben Duncan, who's joining us on the call. And to walk through tonight's agenda, we'll have 2 foundational documents to review and revise. You'll be able to decide whether they're ready for consideration and adoption by the full commission on Wednesday at the end of this meeting. We'll begin with the community engagement framework. We'll move to the values statement, and then ultimately we'll return to the community engagement framework to ensure those are aligned, because there's a statement of values in the current draft form of the community engagement framework. Following the document revisions portion of the meeting, we'll have an initial discussion on approaching the 9 public hearings that are required under Measure 26-2228. So one meeting will be held in the spring, and that will be used to discuss the draft district plan criteria with the public. And then in the summer, the commission must hold 2 meetings in each proposed district before voting to adopt a plan by September 1. This discussion today, again, it's an initial one, and it should help to inform the community engagement work plan that you'll develop once the full commission has passed the community engagement framework. So just as a general overview as to how we'll approach this meeting as a work session and then the next steps, we're going to use a structured discussion format. We, the facilitators, will use a stack method to identify speakers. So essentially just use the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom interface. That'll indicate that you want to speak. We'll track who's been speaking and make sure that we can call in order who's up next and who's on deck. And you can raise your hand to indicate that you'd like to propose a specific item to discuss, or to weigh in on an item that's already being discussed. And at various points, we may use a kind of a round robin format to solicit thoughts from the entire group to make sure that we've heard from everyone who wants to speak, and that we have a full understanding of where everyone is. In terms of next steps, rather than make edits live in this meeting, we'll take notes, recording the agreements on the changes. As you arrive at them, you'll receive a written version of the new documents reflecting those changes for your review. And then if all of this works for you, we'll ask for 1 or 2 volunteers from this work group to present to the full commission on Wednesday as an update. And if you believe that either or both of the documents are ready for consideration among the full commission, after this meeting, we can propose a vote at Wednesday's meeting. And then finally, the adopted version of the community engagement framework should inform the development of the engagement work plan, as I noted, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. This is a pending next step. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Okay, and there is something in the Q&A. There's a question around timing for the public notice, which I believe did come out last week when the meeting was scheduled. And that was posted online. But Sophia, if that's incorrect, please correct me. Okay. So, are there any questions from among the commissioners? And we're good to get started. Perfect. So we'll start with the community engagement framework. And I'm just going to begin by giving an overview of the draft version of the document. So, and how we'll approach it. So we'll start by approaching the framework in sections, starting with the vision statement at the top. And then we'll move and we'll focus on the statement of expectations for what a successful engagement process would look like. We'll follow that up with the statement of objectives for how the commission will approach the work. And for now, we'll skip the statement outlining the values, and we'll return to that once we work on the values document. And Adam, do you mind progressing to the next slide, please? So we're just going to walk through the kind of the basic tenets as they're listed in the draft version of the document. So these are the statement of expectations for what a successful community engagement process and the objectives associated with them. In summary, let's be responsive to the needs and concerns of the community, taking their input into account when making decisions. Deepen understanding of community definitions, identities, and the diverse populations comprising them. Inform Portland residents about requirements for establishing geographic districts. Promote transparency and public trust in local government, and increase clarity and understanding of how Portland's government structures and electoral systems will change. So, to start the discussion, without focusing first on the language, please think about this list as you see it. Are there any other expectations you'd have for what the commission's approach to community engagement should look like in order to be successful? And I ask that you don't necessarily focus on the language, but focus on the content first, and then we'll focus on workshopping and identifying the language afterwards. But is anything missing? Should anything be added? Or do you feel pretty confident with the content that's here?
So I think this is Commissioner Hanson speaking, one thing that I might add to the first bullet is something around not just being responsive to needs and concerns that community members bring to the commission, but actually being really intentionally active in going out into the community and having that be, I mean, I know that there will be all of these public hearings in the proposed districts, but being really explicit about, soliciting input and perspectives and opinions from folks who might not be the first to raise their hand and share their thoughts. Oh, I apologize also for not raising my hand. I will do that next time.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Commissioner Lorente.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that is sort of alluded to here, but something that I would be interested in calling out specifically is ensuring that the communities we're seeking to engage have all the necessary tools and resources and information that they need in order to engage meaningfully. I'm just remembering how in our briefing we had with Paul Mitchell in our last meeting, this work can get very technical very fast. And I would want to be making sure that if we're asking community to take time out of their days to kind of give us feedback, that we make sure that we empower them with the right information in order to engage meaningfully.
Do you have so as you're thinking about it, Commissioner, do you have certain types of information that are more in mind? So for instance, insights into the decision-making process, or definitional work around the criteria or requirements, or just more broadly, kind of creating that as a statement of principle and then using that to guide decisions going forward?
Yeah, I think I shared that more thinking about content than process, although I would say process is equally as important. Yeah, so I think, like, you know, when we ask people to give feedback on criteria, what exactly does that mean? And making sure that we're sort of meeting community where they are in terms of making sure that content is relatable and understandable. I'm just also remembering a number of our fellow commissioners talked about being, you know, math nerds and political science nerds, and then not everybody has that kind of expertise and background. So just making sure that we're making those connections so that community can engage in a meaningful way.
And Commissioner Hanson, would it be fair to say that that's also in line with your thinking around proactively engaging, going out, meeting people where they are?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of build on what Commissioner Lorente was saying, what I was hearing in that is both like content accessibility, like making sure a lot of the like language is really clear. And then I think you were also raising like logistical accessibility in terms of location and time of day and if childcare is available and things like that.
Commissioner Kimura or Commissioner Judd, would either of you like to weigh in at this stage?
No, I'm good right now. Thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Kimura?
I'm fine with that. I'm a little concerned about the time frame. Some of the stuff needs to be possibly translated and it's technical. So do we have enough time between so that we can get that done is the only concern I have. Thank you.
And Commissioner, before you go on mute, the language translation, are you speaking more broadly to all materials produced by the commission or the community engagement framework specifically?
Well, broadly the thing, but with the community engagement, you've got to talk one-on-one. And I believe that not only is it important that I talk to them, but I also give them something to take home with them. So if we don't have materials prepared that are suitable and at the same time in a language that they're most comfortable with, I think we defeat ourselves. So I just am concerned about not having, we don't have to translate everything, but we do have to translate the values and the actual decision-making process that's involved. Thank you.
Key documents, perfect. Thank you. So it sounds like there's nothing that we would add. So beyond what's been discussed so far, beside those contributions, nothing to be removed. Didn't hear anything like that. So specifically focusing on the language, does anything?
Sorry, I do have one thing.
Go, Commissioner Jay.
Maybe it's clear to everybody else, but I guess as I listen to the comments, there's a lot of reference to information being given to the community. And there isn't anything that explicitly talks about the type of information that we're looking to gain from the community. And so this looks like it and sounds like it's kind of one way. I mean, it has in there to be responsive to, but it doesn't really inform the community what their contribution could be and what we're expecting them to bring to the table, and how we are, I would presume, will be in a position of active listening to their concerns.
So I think you pointed out the language in the first bullet point that is kind of implicit, that speaks to it implicitly. And the second bullet point, deepening the understanding of the community definitions, identities, and diverse perspectives, but it does not speak to how you would approach, how you would get that information. Would you like to, so the group can spend some time talking about some of the mechanisms. There are also other opportunities. If these are the, so this section, if it kind of stays this way, maybe too broad for, you may decide that it's too broad to have more of the mechanisms in it, or you can decide to work mechanisms into it. Would you like to start to workshop some language around how you'd like to hear from the community? How you'd like to listen. And I'd also assume that some of those methods, some of those channels may be in broad settings. Some of them may be more one-on-ones or small groups in your roles as commissioners. Do you want to get explicit about that at this point? Seeing some head nods. If you feel ready with certain ideas, we're happy to start noting them. We can also note that if you'd rather do some of that thinking with the broader group, we can also talk about intentionally developing those channels, ensuring, for instance, that they are accessible to both Commissioner Hanson and Lorente's points, that they kind of keep in mind accessibility and logistics. And then to Commissioner Kimura's point, also language accessibility as well, to foster two-way dialogue versus one-way dialogue in either direction. Ben, I think I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm sitting with a couple things I'm hearing. One, and Commissioner Hanson, I think I started hearing this in your first comment. It's really about how are you all being explicit about the who? And I forget exactly what you said, right? Talk to the community. I think those that are not first, it might have been a passing comment. When you talk about community, who are you talking about, and ensuring that you're meeting all of those access needs? And then Commissioner Judd, I hear that as well in what you're saying. It's who's having a deepened understanding, and it might be both, right? It's deepening understanding for the commission as you do your work, and deepening understanding of community definitions of folks in the room. And I guess I'm curious to maybe put it back to you all around some of that explicit definition, right? So Commissioner Judd, when you say, it sounds like it's all, we're kind of giving information out, but being explicit about naming, like, part of the deepening understanding is both that, community will have a deepened understanding about how they talk about definitions and identity, but it's also really important to be explicit that you all are bringing that information. Is that what I heard from you, or please?
Well, so I think it was a couple of things. One, it was definitely the accessibility in terms of like the community having access to the committee and being able to define pathways in which they communicate with us. So, for example, if we talked about logistics, but if someone can't attend a meeting, can they submit something in writing to the group? And what's that pathway there? And what's the requirements for submitting something, right? If community organizations wanted to engage, could they call for an independent one-off kind of conversation that's, focused specifically on them? I think the other thing is, what type of information, I think when we all were asked of the type of information we'd want to have coming on as a commissioner, one of the things that was important to me was understanding where the community fault lines are, where the community's hurts and traumas, historic hurts and traumas, issues have existed, particularly in regards to representation, boundaries, voting principles, and so forth. So to be able to have that type of, I don't want to kind of constrain it by putting a definition on it, but giving them leading points, guiding posts to say, hey, look, these are the types of things that we're eager to hear. Obviously, you can add to this list, but here's some of the things that we're eager to hear from you. And then here are the multiple ways in which you can provide that information to us.
Ben, did you have any follow-ups?
No, I think that was actually really helpful to kind of hear it expanded in that way. Thanks, Autumn.
No problem. Commissioner Kimura. Commissioner, I think you're on mute.
Thank
there
you.
We go.
Yeah, because I forget if I leave the hand up and it's like, forever. I think Commissioner Judd was correct. We also need to bring information that they transmit to us. In some cases, it's a language kind of thing, and in other cases, it might be knowledge that we don't have. I think we need to be really clear that part of our charge is that we will listen. We cannot guarantee that your point of view will be the dominant point of view, but we are definitely willing to listen and to make sure that we take notes that said 15 people said that they didn't want to have the district split along school district lines or something like that, because I think that people feel less like they're participating when their comments are either A, ignored or never acknowledged. And I think we need to do a better job, and I certainly can do a much better job in terms of getting information from them to me. In most cases, when I meet with people, I will have somebody that I know from the community, and this is not always going to be the case, who speaks the language and also who speaks English, so there will be a two-way communication. But I want to be really clear. It isn't my point of view. It is someone who's sitting at 112th and Bush in an apartment building. They're very concerned about some things on how the district is split, or if it's going to make any difference to them at all, in which case I need to actually bring this comment to this whole group and say, this was a concern. Whether we do anything about it or we can't do anything about it is not, I think, the point. The listening has to be a two-way piece. And thank you, Commissioner Judd, for bringing that up.
So thank you both, Commissioner Kimura and Commissioner Judd, for especially really honing in on more of the details around how, and also helping to provide the city staff as they're working to develop the engagement plan, the work plan itself, with giving them direction around the specifics of how you want to engage. So for instance, I think what we've talked about today are those statements of principles that we can build into the framework, kind of agree on those approaches, more broadly speaking, and then ensure that those are taken into account when designing the actual implementation of the engagement plan itself. So, just checking there. So just wanted to summarize some of the themes that we heard in this section of the discussion before we move on to the values. So there were clear themes around transparency, right? Actually defining what that means. And also not just transparency in terms of communicating the process, the how, and providing information in an accessible way, but also fostering discourse, meaningful discourse. That's not just moving in any one direction from the commission or just to the commission, but actually that there are those loops and those that they're forming discussions, and that those discussions are actually informing how you do your work as a full commission in the consideration, and that you're also gaining the knowledge and insights that are needed to really understand the nuances, the depths, the rhythms, and the meaning of community, broadly speaking. And not doing that in a vacuum, right? Knowing that that process is going to be iterative, and that's going to yield information, some of it technical, some of it in bigger principles, some of community intra and inter-community discussions as well, that you're all going to be responding to and incorporating into your work. Just one moment. There was also, second theme was also being proactive as just the principle of how to go about doing that, meeting people where they are, taking into consideration logistics, accessibility, and creating and developing multiple types of channels to be able to serve all different types of needs and individuals within the community. Okay. And then we, of course, have the specific comments as well. And so we'll work to incorporate that into another version, this section. So we'll work on the specific language, but before we move on to the next section, is there any language in addition to kind of promoting more clarity? Is there anything that you would like to strip, any specific language, words, phrases that you don't want to see or that you absolutely want to see reflected in this section? Okay. So we'll move on. Sorry.
I just, I'm not sure, but I would think that one of the challenges in this process is trust, and the trust in the sense that how will community members be able to hold this commission accountable? And it seems like, I mean, and I'm just putting out there broadly right now, but it's something I think that we may want to spend some energy on and talking about what's the level of accountability, and using that word specifically because I think there is some energy behind it. We may want to think about ways in which that we can hold ourselves accountable and make that true.
Made a note of it for this section. There also is a section specifically to accountability and trust in the values statement. And then there's also a shorter section in this document that will tie to between the two that also states the values and how they'll show up too. So just wanted to kind of preempt that one, and we'll see if that works. So we'll spend some time on this specific section around objectives. In short, to summarize the statements here, the commission will communicate proactively throughout the process to developing the district plan, use a variety of mediums to solicit and consider input from residents, provide regular meaningful updates in real time, center equity with a focus on engaging communities that have traditionally been excluded from City Hall and city decision-making, and also take a collaborative community-focused approach that promotes integrity, transparency, and understanding of community dynamics as the commission proposes and adopts districts. So this section may help to address some of the how and the process questions. It may not be enough, but I just wanted to get a sense of how you feel as it works as a starting point. And knowing that if it does work, we can also incorporate some of this language into the top statement around expectations. Okay. Seeing no comments, maybe we'll kind of press pause on this one, look at those revisions to the document, see how they match up, and then see if they work well together, those two sections. Does that sound like a pretty good plan? Okay, I'm seeing head nods. Can I see a thumbs up just to indicate that great, perfect. Okay. And we'll revisit this document again once we've had a chance to review the values and make sure that they tie together, and they should work together as documents side by side. Okay. So let's move to, Adam, do you mind progressing? There we go. So for the discussion of values, we'll start at a high level by just stating the 7 objectives. Accountability was added to the city's 6 core objectives based on initial feedback from multiple commissioners. So we've talked about some of these before, but just to summarize, the 7 are anti-racism, equity, accountability, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility. So we can kind of start with taking them 3 in chunks of 3 and then 4. Are there any values that this group would propose to revise, remove, add, consolidate, or otherwise change? Okay. Now, oh, sorry, Sophia.
No, I was gonna say, let me know if you want me to show the other slides with other values.
Actually, let's move to the next 4, and then we'll look at them as a total, as a whole. Okay. So at least at a high level, transparency, communication, collaboration, fiscal responsibility. Any that you would remove, alter, consolidate. And we can focus at both the kind of the top level as well as the detailed breakdown. And Commissioner Hanson.
I guess one broader question that I have, and this might be part of the values like framing, is bringing up what Commissioner Kimura had brought up at the last meeting that we all had in terms of like how we're thinking about these values. Like, are these things that we are, and kind of how does accountability, like what does accountability look like for us as a commission with these values? Are we going to be checking in on them at every commission meeting and saying, you know, where are we falling short and where are we meeting them? Are we, you know, are we going to, is it more like as we're planning the community engagement activities, we'll be coming back to these as a starting point and saying, where are we in alignment and where are we not, right? Like, is it more kind of aspirational? Is it stuff that we really feel confident we can deliver on? I'm curious what other commissioners are thinking about that, because I think that will help with some of the framing of this and what we choose to include or not.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kimura.
I'm not sure that we're going to deliver on all of them, but I think aspirationally we should try. It's a lot of stuff to keep track of, which is why having a group involved in that, you can't keep track individually. I suppose you could, but I can't keep track of everything. So therefore, if somebody else keeps track of some things that I don't remember, I guess my question though is, if in the course of say 2 or 3 community outreach meetings, we find that we need to modify some of these so that there's either clarity or that there is, well, let's choose, just let me pick one. Storytelling promotes inclusion. Well, I think it does, but if not everybody has a story to tell, are we going to say therefore you're not included? And I don't think we're not going to say that, but that's kind of a stretchy example. But how do we make sure that we look at all of the pieces? And I think we're going to look at staff to ask us, did you follow what have we not covered? Because I'm not going to be able to keep track of them. I'm sure there are many more people who are more organized or more intense on their checklist kind of stuff. But I know that I'm not. So I'm going to try and get all of the broad outlines of all of these 7, but I'm going to miss some. And I don't want to intentionally miss any. And it may be that I just am not able to cover some of that, but the commission as a whole should cover some of it. All of it is what I'm saying. Does that make sense to anybody besides me?
See some head nods. And just as a, just to kind of bring the discussion back to the core of what a value statement is it's a statement of the principles, your beliefs and your principles as a body, as a team, as individuals for how you're going to approach this work, right? And so the idea, and for instance, being able to identify what those levers look like for some of the key items that you'll do on a regular basis, right? What does it mean to embrace the belief that transparency is essential for democratic principles, right? We actually had a discussion around what does transparency mean to us. Then we discussed how do we build in those mechanisms, right? Looking at communication as a basis for a healthy discourse and dialogue, especially in a process like this, right? Embodying that belief that actually the communication is in itself a catalyst for transformative change, and then building that into some of those structures and rhythms. So that's just a thought on how staff and how the broader process and approach, how working agreements, the statement of values, and many of these foundational documents, the plans themselves, can help to reinforce these values. And I think, Ben, I think I saw your.
Oh, you just hit exactly what I was going to say. I think it's a challenge for how you all build it in, right? So everything you do reflects culture and values, right? Whose culture, whose values, and how do you all express that as you do your work? So you named it really well, Autumn. Thank you.
So before we go back to revisit discussion around how the values show up in the engagement plan, just want to be thoughtful. Do any of the values stand out among the 7 as ones that you maybe want to emphasize, build out, and see expressed with more clarity? And Sophia, do you mind going back to the previous slide? I did want to point out accountability and trust, because Commissioner Judd, you did cite that one early on as one that was important to you, and it's also come up among multiple commissioners as well.
So, I was struck in the last meeting where Commissioner Kimura mentioned the difference between something that's aspirational, something that's lived. And I was glad she brought it up, but I was also was overwhelmed by the thought of getting perfect, right? And really spending a lot of time perfecting all of this and missing the true goal in this, which is, when we're stating these values, what we're trying to do. Well, let me just speak for me. When we look at the trauma of not being represented, the trauma of separating communities historically, what we're trying to do is to say, in some ways, we're not going to make that mistake. Well, that the staff, the commission, all have these aspirational goals to do things differently this time. And so, we could wordsmith accountability and tweak it a bit more. I'm not sure if it's really, I think that statement is fine. I think that there's a broad enough palette of different sides of this elephant of values that we're trying to get at, that it does. It speaks to all those areas of harm that the community historically has seen, and that, again, can we accept that good is good enough? And Mr. Kimura, I hope that you don't feel as if we have to, that each one of these values we're going to have to track each week, daily, or anything like that, so that will become good. And so I just think that if we lean into these values, that's going to be the greater impact than the effort of perfecting each one of them. So that's just my feedback.
Much appreciated. And Commissioner Kimura.
I think basically we do want to mind
Uh,
we're not doing. We should.
Commissioner
Pointed out,
Kimura,
and I
your
think and Frank, I'm sorry.
your audio is breaking up.
Oh,
It's coming in and
okay.
out.
I'm gonna get off and come back on. Thank you.
So just briefly before we finalize this discussion, and I apologize, we don't have the slide with the exact language from the draft, the value section of the draft community engagement framework. However, here are the statements themselves. So the draft framework includes the following value statements to highlight alignment with the engagement work. So that's remaining accountable to our core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, fiscal responsibility, and accountability. Being transparent with the public about how we gather information, deliberate, and make decisions. Recognize our responsibility for clear, consistent, and accurate public communications, and develop inclusive strategies to make participation more accessible, promote culturally relevant outcomes, and leverage trusted mediums. So just wanted to note that. I think that we'll go back, we'll work on the revised document, we'll ensure that the values, the discussion that we had today, that all three of those sections are tied together and work together so that you have a draft to review and consider. Does that sound good as a next step? Perfect. So there was discussion in the last full session of the commission of starting to just talk about the approach to holding public hearings. So we talked about there needing to be 9, 1 in the spring and 8 during the summer that are related to the district criteria, the draft district criteria, and then ultimately the draft district plans. So we thought it would be helpful. We thought it would be helpful to begin by discussing what you believe these meetings can benefit, how they can benefit the overall process. For instance, what are some of the positive outcomes you can anticipate from these meetings? And I should note that this discussion will help give the city staff direction to be able to develop the engagement plan, to be able to ensure that the meetings are consistent with the expectations of the commission and that they are aligned with your frameworks, your values, and your working agreements as well. So let's start with potential positive outcomes, things you would like to gain from the meetings and that you would like to contribute to the public as well. Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, so just roughly, I don't know if this is, again, this is definitely aspirational, right? But getting a sense of, I think, a community's priorities in terms of like, however they may define it, right? But from this block to block, what is this community most concerned about? And within that community, who would they look to? What organizations, individuals would they look to? What groups would they look to execute on those priorities? Because I think as we go through this, there's going to be a need to sort of make sure that we are elevating those priorities and sort of being able to define, are there boundaries to these priorities? Do they exist within, blocks, miles, and, just thinking about the last, but do they overcome, geographical structures, like, like here's one thing I've heard living here in Portland, and I had a girlfriend who had met before I lived in Portland. She said she never crossed the river, right? And so that means her priorities for her community was fixed on one side of the river, right? And so I just think that understanding those priorities and how they extend and how far they radiate is going to be important.
Helpful example. Commissioner Lorente, do you have any thoughts about some of the outcomes you might anticipate from the public meetings? Anything you'd like to learn or share?
Yeah, I think when we think about and talk about people being sort of experts of their own lived experience, I think something that I would be listening for in these meetings is just a deepened understanding of how people live in and experience their own city, their own parts of the city. Because I feel like we can talk about criteria ad nauseum, but until you're actually in community, listening to people and having them describe to you or to us, the commission, how they think about the divisions and connections in the city and how they sort of view that is something that I would be listening for. And I think that's sort of the signal that would tell us what sort of criteria are important to community members.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hanson.
I just echo what has been said. I really agree with what both of the other commissioners have shared. I think my a curiosity that I have in terms of an outcome is like an understanding of, again, kind of echoing what Commissioner Lorente was just saying, is like intuitively what might a boundary look like to different people, whether it's the river, whether it's, my school district, like whatever it is, like getting that sense very much in like not the wonky language of the maps and the GIS and the data and all of that, but like from the, again, as Commissioner Lorente said, the lived experience. And I think, so that to me, when I think of these public hearings, I'm sort of thinking of three desired outcomes, and that to me is probably number one. Number two, using it as an opportunity to educate and share, like a bit, again, in kind of layperson's terms, like what this process is, why this information is important, and what we're going to do with it, to Commissioner Judd's comments earlier in this meeting in terms of like what they can expect, right? Like we cannot promise everything will be met, but and we are, gathering all this information. So kind of number one, getting that gut check. Number two, being able to share our own process. And then three, kind of more foundationally, I also see these meetings really as an opportunity for us to live our values. And, and I think stating that as an outcome will help us when we start to craft the process and the structure of what these meetings actually look like. But, an opportunity to live values of storytelling being really important, of transparency, of speaking in very clear and simple terms, of, language accessibility and all this stuff. So that's kind of what is coming up to mind for me. The one other thing that I will add is it is my understanding, and please, Sophia or someone correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that the public hearing on draft criteria will happen, that's like soliciting feedback before we actually start looking at maps or drawing any type of line. But then the July meetings will actually be a reaction to like draft one. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And
sorry, I couldn't find my views. Yes. Sorry, yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay. So I guess in that something that I'm wondering, and maybe we can talk about on Wednesday, is how do we do some of this like outreach, meeting people where they are, getting a sense of like who's not going to cross the river, right? Or like what the boundaries are in this public hearing on draft criteria section before we start. Because I guess I worry if we are not really intentional at the onset during this March period. Like I don't want to get to July and all of a sudden be hearing this thing across all 4 proposed districts that none of us have heard before. So that's something I'm just kind of thinking about.
One flag or one just comment that I wanted to resurface from the last meeting was that just one of the expert on redistricting, when he did his presentation, one thing that he did want to encourage you all to keep in mind is that you'll constantly be gaining more information as you're hearing more, as you're sharing more, as you're listening more, as people are thinking about questions that you're posing to them or that others are posing to them too. And so this notion of, what is a community? He said it's going to continue to evolve throughout the entire process. So that's just a reminder that getting it right from the start doesn't exist. Perfect doesn't exist, because you're constantly learning, and the discourse will be one of evolution, right? Because you're not just having the discussion with community. Members of the community will also be having their own discourse as well, and that should be informing how they relate to you and one another as well. So it's just a thought. And Commissioner Judd, I see. I think I see.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up, because there's another aspect to that, again, implicit in accountability, I guess. So let me check something real quick, though. I can see by looking at the schedule how the first round in each district are kind of close together. Then there's a second round in each district, respectively, as well. And I presume that is to ensure that one, that if as communities begin to hear about things, that things are percolate out, and then there was an opportunity to follow up. I guess, and again, just to follow up on what you were saying in terms of there's not a perfect, but also in this notion of accountability. We don't. I presume that the listening meetings we have right now also are listening posts where the commission is asking questions and we're getting feedback. We're presenting guidelines and getting feedback. But to Commissioner Kimura's point, when do we pitch back? This is what we heard you say.
So, is that a question you'd like to pose to the broader group? Would you like to discuss that among the full commission? Is that something that you'd like to intentionally work into the engagement plan?
I was in earnest asking questions. I didn't know if you had it in your back pocket and you were like, yo, it's going to come on this date. That'd been cool. But if we don't have that, I think that's an important item to add. Yes, I would love to talk more about it.
Yeah. I think it's that it comes into, I think it's very much a part of what every commissioner here has actually touched on this point around what is the cadence? What are the different approaches to communication that exist? Knowing that also, none of you said, I only want to rely on meetings to form my understanding of what is happening. Right. So I imagine that would also be consistent in you not wanting to necessarily communicate what you've heard only in meetings. Right. So what are some of the other channels that you have? Written outreach, meetings with community groups, specific one-on-one interactions that you have, using all of these different mechanisms, and also using the 13 official members, 3 alternates, and the 3 reserve alternates also as a full body, and having that coordinated and being able to have communication among yourselves about what you're hearing. That's just, in general, some of the things that we've talked about as the mechanisms, but you're absolutely right? The cadence for the meetings, they're staggered to be both close to one another and to provide that feedback so that you're actually having these discussions in real time with different communities, and you're able to establish those feedback loops.
Yeah. So to your point then, because we have a schedule when the meeting occurs, but we don't have an agenda for the meetings at this particular point. And so it may be, it may make the most sense to ensure that as each meeting is concluded, that there is a pitch back that all stakeholders go, yes, that I said that, you heard me, and we conclude and we take that with us. So that at least we have time scheduled in each one to do that. That'd be great.
And create a record. And creates a record for everyone too, right? That's a great addition to the list of outcomes. Okay, final question before we adjourn. is there kind of a definite set of information you would like to receive from or share with members of the community before the hearings? So I think I kind of hit on this question because I think Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Judd, you both spoke to it. I think what we heard is, at least following the meetings, we would like to establish a record of what we heard, right? Going into those meetings, are there specific aspects of the information that you need to know before you feel like you're ready to convene them? And Commissioner Kimura, we haven't heard from you. Oh, we might have lost her. Okay. Are there any other thoughts on anything you would like to hear or share before you actually convene the meetings to ensure that everyone's showing up with some of the key information? And I'll assume the draft criteria and the draft plans are kind of baked in, but anything else? Commissioner, I think I saw Commissioner Judd come off mute, but Commissioner Hanson, you raised your hand. So yes. I'll go with Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I was going to say Commissioner Judd. Well, I was actually going to kind of uplift what Commissioner Judd had suggested at the beginning of the call in terms of being really clear about what would be helpful for us. So maybe that's a matter of developing a couple of key questions to like pose to the public before the public hearings and saying, for example, like, in these public hearings, we want to hear from you. What is most important in your opinion to us as we consider this? What are you concerned we will forget? Like what, you know, what, I don't know if we want to ask specifics around like, what are the most important or egregious, not egregious, but like potentially egregious, like things that we could do or things that you want us to keep in mind, but maybe like, you know, 3 or 4 just really clear, concise questions of like, if you have an opinion on this, we want to hear from you. And this is the information that's going to be the most useful to us as we are then, you know, taking all of this feedback and moving forward. Who should we be talking to, right? Like whatever it is.
Perfect. And we do have the notes, Commissioner Judd, from your remarks at the top as well. And did you have anything to add before we?
Yeah, and this is acknowledged a personal bias because as much as I enjoy engaging in the theoretical and the abstract, when it comes to large groups, my mind goes to being tactical or tactile and visual. And so it would be great if we went into each one of these hearings with an understanding, with a big map, with an understanding of where people have defined their community centers to be, right? So we asked them in advance, what are your community centers? Broadly define that, really let them, you know, define what that looks like and give an explanation for why they regard it as such. When we start these conversations, you know, by district, we can have this kind of mapped out. And we can then hold ourselves accountable to make sure that did the discussion cover these community centers, or did they miss them? And hear the collective responses about why, yes, that works in terms of my community center, or it doesn't. Here's the reasons why. But at least it grounds you in some visual representations as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before we move on to just finalizing the next steps, Commissioner Lorente, is there anything you wanted to add around the strategy, outcomes, or things you'd like to learn beforehand?
Nothing to add, but I would just echo what Commissioner Hanson had shared earlier. I was talking about making sure that we are empowering community with, you know, information and resources and things like that that are necessary to engage meaningfully. And I think those kinds of questions that Commissioner Hanson raised are kind of wrapped into that as well. Just knowing for community to know exactly the kind of information that would be useful to us and the kind of input we're hoping to get from them, and making sure that people are shown up prepared for that kind of engagement. I think it's kind of like the equivalent of, getting questions in advance to an interview. You're making sure that the person arriving is going to be prepared to tell you what the other person needs to hear. So I would just kind of underscore and emphasize that.
I love that comparison. Okay, so thank you, commissioners. Your work on the work group has already yielded meaningful feedback. So once the full body has approved the version of the community engagement plan and the values, we'll get to work on actually drafting the engagement work plan itself. Sorry, I think I said. Once you've approved the framework, we'll get to work on the actual work plan itself. That will get more into the details and the specificity of cadences, details, and the mechanisms, more of the tactics themselves. We'll need to coordinate a report out to the commission on Wednesday. So if someone would like to volunteer this evening to do the readout, we would prefer to have a member of the work group actually report to the group. You'll have revised versions of the documents themselves, though they may not be ready for a full vote because you may still want to workshop them. That's okay, but we still would like to inform the broader group and the public on the work you've done so far this evening. So if someone would like to volunteer right now, great, we can also do this. We can coordinate via email as well if you want to think about it. We'll coordinate via email.
I thought I saw Commissioner Hash's hands raised, but
I also thought I saw.
No, I was making eyes at both of you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Judd, I would nominate you if I don't know if that's
look here. On a serious tip, we do need to follow back up with Commissioner Kimura because she dropped off when she had a critical point. And since she ain't here, we could always volunteer her.
It's I was gonna say it's not really fair to decide without her here, but
oh my bad. Well, yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll just confirm over the next couple of days who would be the best positioned. Okay. By positioning, I mean would like to do it. So we'll coordinate, but just in earnest, thank you for your time. Thank you for the thoughtfulness and just the intentionality around really bringing these together, and not just the words, statements, right? The intention, but also really looking for those accountability mechanisms and how do we put this into practice. So that's how this work will get done in a meaningful way, and really happy to have you on board doing it. So thank you. We'll adjourn and follow up via email on next steps.
Thank you for facilitating us so deftly.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Good
great
night, everyone.
Yeah, thank
Good
you,
evening.
commissioners.